name is Rachel, and this is our data meeting 2 with Group 1 that includes both Scott and Richard. So, we used Google Hangouts to meet on Sunday, June 25th at 8 p.m. So, Richard, Scott, and I decided to use my data since my classes are still active and I'll have continuous access to all the data throughout the semester. So the rules for this meeting, all of us were researchers. I was the leader, Richard is the facilitator, and Scott is the consolidator. So, linking our exploratory questions to the artifacts, the main one that we chose was, what are the students struggling with that's causing them to fail or drop out of the program, and will differentiated instruction reduce the rate of failure or dropout? So here is something that we looked at initially, which is previous education versus final grade in the last class that they took, and there was not a significant difference between there's not a correlation between those two things, but here's just the visual of what that looks like. We also looked at student progress over 3 semesters, and where some students did poorly in a class or two, if a student fails one class, they essentially have to take it over and then can come back into the next cohort and complete the program. So, just as an overview, I have a 4-module or 4-semester program. It takes about a year to complete. Artifact number 1 is students who have failed one class in the program by the midpoint of the program. So 4 out of the 13 students who started the program failed at least one class. And the question is, how does this affect his or her outcome in the course overall? Artifact number 2 is the final grade in the last class that they completed versus the final exam grade. So looking at the final grade in the course versus the final exam grade, the final grade in the class includes various types of return demonstration, and the final exam is just a standard test assessment. Some of the students have a final grade that is less than a 10% difference from the final exam grade, and then some students it's vastly different. It can be more than 10% and even up to 24.4 difference in their final grade as compared to their final exam assessment. And as I did include in this class last semester, my first go at differentiated learning and helping the students with this, I was wondering, is differentiated learning helping the students who would do worse otherwise? So that is a question that I have for artifact number 2. And here is a chart just so you can see the overall grade of the course is in blue and the final exam grade is in red. Artifact number 3 is the average of all of last semester's grades. So how are all of these students doing in the 3rd module semester of the course? And this is an average grade in their most recent semester that they've completed. And here's a graph of this. And in looking in this graph, we kind of discussed a few questions. Out of the 3 classes, the class that seems to have the lowest grades is the neuro class. So we were kind of talking about what we think I could potentially do to bring that grade up. So artifact number 4. Of the 13 students who started the program, 2 students at this point have dropped out. These 2 students are also 2 of the 4 original group who failed a class in the beginning. So of students who failed a class in the beginning, that is a 50% ratio of dropouts. So is failing a class in the beginning of the program an indicator that a student would drop out, and what can I do to better support these students once they fail one class? So here is our artifact sheet. So initially I put in the 4 artifacts as I had them set up, and my color is yellow. I just highlighted in yellow what I believed it was. Students who failed a class, I put it may be an instructional gap. So what I need to do is find some differentiated learning so I can reach all of these students. And the relative significance I put is a 4, so I'm pretty concerned about this. And the prominence is, there were 4 out of 13, so I'm saying it's at like a mid-grade level. The final grade versus the final exam, I put it could be a learning gap or an instructional gap, and I'm going to look into this a bit more and come up with an answer, but I do think it's a little bit of both, and for me that's a 5. I would like to have the final exam assessment really be indicative of what their grade is, although a final grade is often higher than a final exam grade anyway. And the prominence, we all three put 4. So, the third artifact, average of Mod 3 grades, I put that as a learning gap, so it seems like everyone's kind of around the same area, and everyone is passing that attempts Mod 3, so I put that as a learning gap, relatively high in a significant range, and the prominence is overall with all the students. And then the last one is students dropping out versus students continuing. I think it's both a learning gap and an instructional gap. Learning for the students who dropped out, but I want to go back and see if them failing a class, there's something I can do to intervene. So I put this as significance 5, but prominence as 1 in the overall students. So Richard's feedback is in blue, so we gave each other different colors. And Scott, his is in green. So they all had different comments based on what I said, and some of them disagreed a little bit with some of the things that I picked off here, and here is how we showed who chose what in the end. So Richard said that not quite as many much of an issue with students who failed a class, because about half of them who failed are excelling and getting back on the horse. He also said the gap between exam versus course is not overly dramatic, but the gap does persist for pretty much all students. What can we do to bridge that gap? And then what can be done to improve the understanding in the neuro unit? We discussed this all as a group, and can there be more front loading done to focus on the terminology or some of the skills? And Scott had questions about the individual students who dropped out. One student dropped out and did not go back, but another student seemed pretty successful but ended up dropping out in the end. So we we had a really nice lively discussion about our artifacts, and everyone kind of chimed in with their different ideas about the artifacts. So reflections on this meeting, meeting 2 and looking forward. While looking at these 4 artifacts during our meeting, we tried to deduce what we could do to minimize both the instructional gaps and the learning gaps that each artifact presented. So some of the questions are, does each artifact presented have an instructional gap, a learning gap, or both? And arguments can be made for those. And how can we use each individual artifact to answer our exploratory questions? So that was something that we discussed in our meeting. So artifact 1, we discussed as a reflection, what remediation should a student go through when he or she fails a course to help them move back on track? Artifact 2 would be incorporating more differentiated learning assessments into each course in order to reach the learning needs of more students. Artifact 3, improve the instruction material in the courses where students are getting lower grades across the board, such as the neuro class. And artifact 4, students tend to drop out for a variety of reasons. If the learning gaps and the instructional gaps are addressed, will there be fewer dropouts? So at the start of the program, I'm considering giving the students an aptitude assessment to identify learning gaps in the beginning, and maybe this will help me bridge those gaps and see where some students will falter before they actually fail a class. So overall, this meeting was a lot smoother and about half as long as the first data meeting. We're getting more comfortable with one another and more comfortable with the data. We only needed one meeting this time instead of 2 to accomplish our tasks. Since we have seen the roles previously performed, we had a better idea of what was expected of the roles. and we're getting to know each other better, so it's easier to work together and collaborate. Based on how smoothly this meeting went, I feel like we should have no problems moving on with data meeting 3, and at this point we feel pretty comfortable working with one another. So here are our references for this meeting.